Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I think I'm going to do something with some prongs. I decided to do a ring, and I picked out a synthetic ruby that I have that's about a 6 by 8 emerald cut, and I think it'll be pretty. Um, I'm going to kind of have step down sort of shoulders on the ring next to the stone. I've not done something quite like that before, so I'm going to give it a try and see how it works out. I need to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patreon are my core group of supporters. They are a marvelous group with a lot of talent and who are super nice. I appreciate their financial support, but I really appreciate the community that they've built over there. It's a nice place. Thank you for that. My YouTube subscribers, we just passed 22,600, I think. That's amazing, and I never ever thought I would reach that kind of a following. So thank you for that, and thank you for the really nice comments that you leave. That really makes me feel good when I get some positive input like that. And thank you also for the financial contributions. I appreciate the super thanks and the buy me a coffees and people who buy my merch or my ebooks. Those things really keep me afloat while I make these videos, so it makes it possible. Thank you so much for your kindness. All right, well, let's get started on this project. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks. This particular model has the gauge chart to inches to millimeters, which I find pretty useful. Some of the other ones have different charts on them. I'll show you. I have an order in, so I'll show you some when I get them on one of the future videos. But what I really like about them is it has this nice dot matrix in the background that's kind of subtle, and so it doesn't intrude on your ideas, but it allows you to keep things sort of symmetrical, which is challenging for me at times, as you can see from my picture today. This is the basic idea I wanted. I wanted kind of a simple ring, and I was going to put a prong here, 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 here on top of this square bearing that we build. And then I'm going to put some pieces of 10 gauge square off to the side here and taper them a little bit and see if I can get them to fit and step down. I was initially just going to do it like that, but I think I need to really drop it lower as we go. So we'll see how that works out. I can also probably round this a little bit after we get everything put together. And then I will use 18 gauge sheet for the band itself. So this is a huge ring, so I'm probably not going to make it quite that big. I'm going to try and size it down a bit. But we'll give it a shot and see how it works. Let me show you the stone. So it seems like an appropriate moment to talk about some things, some terms that get thrown around in metalsmithing and gemology. And sometimes people don't always understand what the terms mean. There's two terms that sound a little bit alike, simulated and synthetic, and there's a difference between what those are, and it's important to know the difference, I think. Simulated means it's something that's an imitation of something else. It's not actually the same thing. Synthetic means it is exactly the same as the natural one. For instance, this is a synthetic ruby, so chemically it's exactly the same as a natural ruby, pretty much. It's made out of the same material, same internal atomic structure and everything. However, it's manufactured in a laboratory because they figured out how to do that. So they can grow ruby crystals in a laboratory, and that's what a synthetic is versus a simulant. So, so this is a synthetic ruby. This particular one's 6 by 8, and it's. I was noticing on these ones, I don't know where I got these, but they're cut a little rough. They're not. They probably were cut in a low technology environment where they're using jam peg faceting machines, which is where you have just a board sticking up and different angles drilled through it that you stick the dop in. So not all of the angles are always perfect. You end up with some variation in the facets, and this one kind of looks like it's got a few, but it's still pretty, and it produces a lot of light and sparkle, so I like it. So we'll use it. But our first step is going to be to build this little platform or bearing that we're going to set that on top of, I think. And I'm going to use 12 gauge, or no, 10 gauge square. Sorry. 10 gauge square is 2.6 millimeters, I think. And where's that piece of it? Here's a bigger piece of it that I'll be using to build the rest of this stuff too. But the platform for this I want to be pretty chunky, and that's why I'm making it out of this. And we're going to use the miter vise jig to cut angles on it. And I did a little bit of pre-cutting to get the measurements about where I wanted them to be. And I basically just lined them up on my drawing and then marked them, and then I used them in the miter vise jig to get them as close as I could. So let's go ahead and we can use these as gauges to measure the other two once we have them at the length we want. And then this is a miter vise jig, which allows you to cut nice 45s and 90s. And so I'm going to just slide it in here like that. I'm going to try and get it lined up so it's just completely through there. And then I'm going to look, I have it laid along this little, what do you call it, like a miter fence almost that's inside of this. And I want to make sure it's touching both sides and then tighten these down pretty good. Like touching on this side and touching on this side so that I know that it's flat up against there. That'll get us a really nice 45-degree angle then, so we can do like a little frame. And I have enough here sticking out that I can cut some of this off just to save myself some filing. I wouldn't get too close to it because it'll deform it a little bit, but I left it far enough away to where when I file it, it'll be filing away the deformation that's created by pinching it. When I first got one of these about 2.5 or 3 years ago, I didn't even know they existed, but I finally made a video about how to use them. Since I've had it long enough, I think I've figured it out pretty much. So if you're interested in seeing the basic ideas behind a miter vise jig, I'll put a link up there to the video. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do to make one just the same as this one. I'm going to line them up back to back like that. Actually, first off, let's get rid of, there's a little bit of burr on there. Sometimes when you file something, it leaves a little bit of that material on the edge that'll kind of mess up your eye. By that I mean it'll mess up when I'm looking to measure this and get it exact. I don't think it'll actually mess up your eye unless you get it in your eye. Okay, so sometimes when I want a really pretty close to exact measurement, I will make sure that things are lined up, and I'll use a Sharpie, a permanent marker, and I'll use that so I can scratch an exact line right where it meets, like that. Okay. And I'm only angling it that way because I want to remember that that's the way I need to go, not that way. So we'll line it up in the miter vise jig, and it'll automatically put that nice 45 on there, but that'll just tell us where to line the edge up with. If that makes sense. Hopefully you can see that okay. So we're just going to kind of feed it in there. I'm going to get it close, and then I'm going to tighten these down just a little bit. Because sometimes, like when I look in there, I can see it's angled a little bit in here. Sometimes I'll take something like my soldering pick here, make sure it's pushed straight up against that little fence that's in there. And we'll just kind of tighten it down the rest of the way then, and we can go ahead and file it. That should get us pretty close. I think that's pretty good. So let's do the second one. and then we can line them up and see how rectangular we can get it. The way I gauged the size for this was I wanted there to be a border sticking out around it, so I have a lip to mount these prongs on, and then I will be tapering the inside of this down a little bit so the pavilion of the stone will kind of sit down in there a little bit and seat the stone nicely. At least that is my hope. I have another big show coming up this weekend. This one I'll be in Loveland, Colorado, which is in northern Colorado. If you're in the area, stop by and say hi. Last weekend I got to meet one of my patrons that I hadn't met before. That was nice. Sometimes I use my little square here to kind of make sure I have it pretty 90. Because they will fluctuate a little bit because, you know, the tolerances on some of these miter vise jigs aren't, you know, as good as like engineer quality. They're pretty good. Oh, the torch I use for those people who are new to my channel is a Silversmith model. It's an acetylene air torch. It pulls in atmospheric air through these holes, mixes it with gas, produces a hotter flame than propane or butane generally, but not as hot as oxyacetylene because we're not pumping pure oxygen into the flame. Oxyacetylene produces over 6,000 degrees, if I remember right, which is far hotter than you really need most of the time with silver. You can melt a bunch of silver faster with that. My tank is getting a little low on this, so see if I can get through this project without having to change it. So I got 3 out of the 4 there. One of them jumped over just onto one like that. So when that happens, generally there's a couple of possible reasons. One of them is that this piece over here had reached temperature, but this piece was not quite there, so it jumps onto the side where it's hot enough. The other thing is there was a slight gap between those two, and solder doesn't like to jump gaps, and so pushing it together causes usually that to resolve itself. So let's cool that off and file it a little bit, see how it looks. This is another one of those cases if you want to do the outsides really nice and square, you could put it through this other section of the miter vise jig. So that's going to fit right on there. But we need to taper it down a little bit, so we're going to go over and use a burr to kind of taper that edge down. Okay, I put a little ball burr on here, probably an 1/8 of an inch, maybe, or 2 millimeters or whatever. But I'm going to use that to remove some material right off the bat. So looking at a 45-degree angle kind of. Now I'm going to put a diamond burr that's kind of cylindrical. Or actually kind of more of a cone, but it's kind of got diamonds all the way around. Use that to kind of smooth this out and shape this a little bit. I like to do the corners like this. So you can see it's starting to seat down in there a little bit. So I'm going to keep going with that a bit more until we get it to sit down in there a little bit deeper. Okay, so we've got that kind of ground down. I will neaten that up a little bit with the file, probably. And then before we're done, we'll do a little polishing. But one of the things I was thinking about while I was cleaning that up a little bit, should I put the prongs on now, or should I put the prongs on later? And I think later is the answer, so I think I'm going to add those right at the very end, maybe. I think we can cut some pieces of this 10 gauge square and see if we can start stepping them down as far as we can, and then we'll go from there. I just had a thought. We could put one right here to immediately drop it a little bit and then go down from there. That might give us a little more roundness that way. I think let's try that and see. I'm going to try and solder one here and one here on the back. So let's do a couple of things here. So I'm going to do some pick soldering, which is where I pick up a little bit of solder on the end of this titanium pick, heat the piece up to the right temperature, and then touch the pick to it. It's a really convenient way of getting some solder where you want it to go. And the other concept that is useful to know is the idea of sweat soldering. And that's where you pre-melt some solder onto a piece where you want it to be before you put the secondary piece on there. So it's just got the solder right where you want it already, and it's only melted to one, but then you just reheat it until it flows again and melts to the other. And that is a useful technique sometimes too. See, I got a little ball of solder on there. Let's try that and see how it goes. It's pretty smooth on that end. Let's see if we can't get this side that way too. All right. So now we got it a little higher, which I think will help. And we can stagger it down from there. So. I'm just scribing a line. Theoretically, I'm scribing a line. Just a little ways up from the bottom. so I know where to line up the next piece. So we need 2 more of these. Let's flatten this out a little bit. So we want to solder these on like that. However, I want them to be dipped down a little bit. So I think let's see if we can get this thing to work. This is a softer pad that you can push things into. That's not too bad. If it doesn't move too much. Oops. Well, let's give that a try. If I can do it without bumping anything, it would be amazing. I'll end up using the miter vise jig to get this as precise as I can, but I'm going to file some of it off first. So you've already watched me do this, so I'm not going to make you watch me do this part again. Okay, I did a little bit of experimenting. I was kind of free-handed filing this. You can use the miter vise jig also to, if you tilt it slightly in there, to get a pretty good angle. I wanted these to just kind of taper inwards a little bit, and then we'll shape one to match that to go to be the last one that we do. But and you can see I found the center point, so I know where to file to. So I'm just putting a slight angle on there that peaks in the middle. Okay, that tapers in a little bit. Like the next one, we want to be a little bit smaller. And this is, the bottom part here is going to be the 18 gauge band. So this will be the last square wire that we need, I think. But I think we need to bend it slightly in the middle so it matches that now. I've created a slight angle there. That's where I'm going to try and bend it. I may put a little notch in this with the saw maybe, so I can bend it slightly there. Sometimes I use the file. Maybe I can just get by with the file. We'll see. But I'm going to cut another one of these really quick. I line up this line I made in the middle, I can just run my saw right down that just to get it started. And then I might use my file to widen it out a little bit. So let's see what this looks like if I just do this a little bit. Okay, let's give this a bend just a little bit. I just kind of file the notch in it a little ways. Okay, let's see if that fits up against that. Wherever it went. There it is. It's actually pretty good. So I think what I might do is solder this notch closed. And then we'll get this perched on something so we can elevate this as well. Just a little bit. Okay, so let's do that on the second one. Now I want to find something that I can elevate this with that is less likely to stick to it. So, I think I can still use these if I want to. But we need something, because I'll put these under the outer ones, and then we'll need something a little bit taller for the inner ones. So let me see if I can find something. I wonder if these will work. These are... I'll have to cut the ends off of these. These are old, like felt wheels, the shafts from them. Let's see if I can cut this off with a saw. Okay, let's see how this works. Let's put a teep in this way so it can't move too much. And maybe one. Well, let's give that a try, because I think I just got to push these up against there, and, you know, with a little luck things will go okay. What's the worst that could happen? You say, here goes nothing? Doo-doo-doo. Okay, now we got to kind of figure out how to put a band on here. So I do like how that stepped down more nicely. I think that was a good idea to put the bottom one down here. And then we can make a band out of 18 and just kind of smooth it right into. Okay, so we got to figure out how big around it needs to be. Let's say we want to. Let's go with like a 9.5. Yeah, let's do a 10. This is going to be a big, bold ring, so. Okay, mostly I wanted to get an idea about whether this was going to work okay, and I think it will. So what we can do is we can deduct the length from this part to this part from the length of the piece of sheet we need to cut. So okay, so we can cut about that much off. Okay, and if we want to be just a little bit narrower than this, not like that. Okay, I'm going to shape this into a band kind of near the bottom of the mandrel. Once you get it round at this stage, so I really want these ends to end up kind of at the end of these, the edge of the bottom squares that we got going on there. So what we can do is we can gradually work it up the mandrel. And see where we're at. You know, pretty soon we'll get kind of in the range of where we need to be. That's kind of where we want to be, but I also want to file these flat now, like this way flat. Now we're starting to look what I want it to look like. Kind of like that. So I feel like Really need to get a new magnesia block. They're all broken. You could use some paste solder here if you wanted to. Less chance of bumping into it. But let's we're going to make an X out of some 18 gauge round wire. Actually, let me see if I got any 16. I like 16 better for stuff like this. Here's some 16. Let's use 16. 16 is 1.3 instead of 1 millimeter. So we're going to make an X so we can make a little kind of like cage perched on top of this, and then we'll cut it off afterwards. But we can mark exactly where we want those prongs to be. Right there. That'll get us kind of in the vicinity. It doesn't need to be hugely tall, not with something that's seated down in there like that. So let's do this. Kind of about that long. So I used to, in the old days, only use hard silver solder, but I've been convinced it's worthwhile once in a while to use something else. So to attach these prongs, I'll probably use some medium paste solder, just because less likely something's going to go sideways on this thing. Do not know if you can see, but I've created kind of like a cage by bending them down and filing them flat and trying to get them to sit exactly where I want. I may not need to do that on this one. Let's see. Most of the mass is in the big lower part of this, not that little cage, so most of the heating is going to be down here. The third hand also soaks up a lot of heat and makes it a little bit harder to get it up to temperature. But we wanted to get it to the flow temperature of medium solder, which is about 80 degrees less than hard solder. If I recall correctly. That's probably good, so I'm going to go ahead and let that pickle. So I've got things polished up, and I just cut these off just, they're probably, for this one, ended up being about 3.5 millimeters tall, which was sufficient to have plenty of room above the girdle of the stone. I'm going to use the Dremel also, probably with an abrasive white wheel, and taper these down into points. and kind of thin them out towards the top. And then I'm going to come back and we'll set that stone. So to do this, I'm using one of these knife edge silicone white wheels. They're the more abrasive ones. And I'm just basically going to shape these prongs into kind of claws carefully. You don't have to do pointy ones if you don't want to. Sometimes do something more rounded looking or something squared off. It's a geometric ring or something. This is sort of geometric, that's what it is. Okay. So let's say I'm kind of tapered into that shape. Now I'm going to kind of out in this direction a bit. And then I'll use one of these blue wheels to kind of shine these up a little bit more. Okay, let's go back and set that stone. One thing I would suggest is if you're doing something that's cut irregularly like this stone, and of course I'm human, and when I'm cutting those bevels in there, I'm certainly not getting them perfect. So see which way the stone looks best. So I looked at it both ways, and this side it squares up the best with everything, so I wouldn't have to do much alteration to make it look good. This is different than some people do. I use this as both for bezels and for prongs. I use this flat side as kind of a pusher, and so I'm going to start pushing these down a little bit over those corners. I usually go opposite. With some stones, when you're doing this stage, you need to be super careful because putting a lot of pressure in one little spot on the stone, and you can cause a fracture in some of them. So, alright, well, I think that looks pretty nice. Oftentimes after I do that stage, I'll go back with that blue wheel again and clean up any kind of asymmetry or things that don't look smooth on the prongs that I might have missed, and then I'll be done. So I think I'm pleased. That was a little harder than I expected as far as getting all of the tiers lined up right, but I think I like the way it turned out. So let me know what you think. Tell me, if you were to do it, would you do it a different way? How would you go about it to get kind of a tiered look like that? So, all right, well, I get some better pictures and put them at the end. All right, well, that was the synthetic ruby shoulder ring. I hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. And I'd love it if you'd visit my YouTube main channel page. I have recently put up a playlist there because I realized that it didn't show all of my videos. And the playlist is called All Videos Chronologically, I believe, and it's right on the main page, so it's easy to find. You can see all 500 plus videos that I've made in the past 3.5 years. I'm certain you'll find something useful or interesting over there, so make sure to watch a few videos and subscribe to my channel. The other thing is visit the video description down below for some important links if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks. Those are super handy and a great place to keep track of your projects in. There's a link to my ebooks if you want to get yourself a guide to either 2023 or 2024's videos. They're ebooks, and each book contains a link to the video, but it also contains pictures of the project, pictures of the sketch I drew initially, a list of materials you need to make it, some other information I thought about post-video for each project, as far as things like, did I enjoy it? Would I change how I did things based on how the project went? Did I like the outcome, or did I not like the outcome, and why? So all sorts of stuff like that I think is useful, and shows what I learned from the videos, as well as having a link right to the video itself. Finally, there's a link to my Patreon, which is that nice group of people I told you about at the beginning. And it's a great artistic community where you can share ideas and post pictures of the work that you're making on the Discord server that we have. And it's just a great community, so check it out if you're interested in that. And thanks for watching today. I appreciate it. Take care. Happy silversmithing.